morning, everyone. We're here this morning to discuss the future of work from a longevity perspective. And I think really what we want to achieve here is exchange some ideas. And Yvonne, you're going to give us a bit of your thoughts, and hopefully we'll bounce back on some of the points you're raising. I probably want to ask 2 or 3 questions based on what you're going to say to us this morning. And I think then hopefully we'll all take something valuable away from that debate. But before we start, maybe we take 5-6 minutes to introduce each other so that we know who we are talking with. I will just start. So I'm obviously hosting this roundtable. It's an absolute pleasure for me. My name is Gerald Moser. I'm the Chief Market Strategist at Barclays Private Bank. The reason why I'm here is because we are focusing on long-term thematic, and of course longevity is one that was quite important for us last year, and that we continue to try and reflect when talking with our clients in terms of investment opportunities. So that's it on my side. Maybe we take each 1 or 2 minutes to introduce each other and also explain a bit of the background and why you're interested in the longevity topic. Yvonne, maybe you kick it off.
Thank you. Yeah, so I work for Mercer. If any of you don't know Mercer, we're a global consulting firm specializing in HR and people consulting. My work revolves around the implications of longevity from a work perspective. So living longer, working longer, what does that mean for the workplace, for employment models, and so on. And I'll share some of my thoughts today on where that's all going. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. Maybe Jeanne, what about you?
My name is Jeanne de Servance. I've been, I've over 20 years in the financial services field, primarily insurance. I've been working with the Aegon Center for longevity and retirement on a lot of issues regarding healthy and active aging, and really looking at the intersection of retirement savings and healthy and active aging, and also, you know, with focus on work and even the gig economy.
Thank you very much, John. Matt, what about you?
Hi everybody, and thanks for the invite. My name's Mark Glover. I'm the Global Head of Financial Planning for the HSBC Group. The HSBC, our retail business, represents around 50 million clients in 33 countries. My bit of the business is responsible for how we give advice to our clients, and we follow a needs-based approach for advice where we focus on clients' core needs. Retirement is, as we see across our countries, one of the most important things that our clients are thinking about. And I think we've moved well beyond thinking about retirement as a thing, really now thinking about later life and how clients can glide into later life in a way with a degree of financial independence, and actually having knowledge about what financial independence is. Many clients, that's still sort of quite a philosophical debate for them, understanding what they need in their later life and how that might make an impact on them. So thank you for the invite.
Thank you very much, Mark. Over to you, Matt. What is your interest in longevity and background?
Thank you, Gerald. Yes, so I'm Matt Singleton. I'm from Swiss Re. Swiss Re is a reinsurer, which essentially means we insure insurers. I actually specialise in the development, among other things, of products for the aging society. By academic background, I'm also a gerontologist. I did a master's in gerontology at the Centre for Research on Aging at the University of Southampton. And actually my dissertation, my thesis was around retirement and how the change from defined benefit to defined contribution pensions will change the nature of retirement and specifically when we retire.
Well, I'm sure that will be a topic for later on. Tayaba, what about you?
Oh, hi there. My name's Tiaba Jordan. I'm a corporate health and wellness coach. I'm an ambassador for the UK Health Coaching Association, and just I've been very involved in startup groups and also trying to give knowledge and understanding of health, mental health, and general health and wellness in groups of people that will become our future leaders. Very happy to join and hear some of the things that you guys have to say.
So very happy to have you on board. Thanks for joining. Sandrine, could you please in a few words tell about yourself?
First of all, I didn't realize this was a round table. Sorry about my appearance. I was like, oh shit, everyone, camera's on. But anyway, I did look better than all the other ones that nobody could see me. But anyway, so my background is I'm a doctor with general practice background, but also I like Matt, I'm a gerontologist. I completed my master's in gerontology at King's College London. And I think all aspects of the aging population fascinate me. So all aspects of this Congress have actually been quite great for me. But I think I said to Yvonne in one of my messages to her, I think I became more of a feminist as I did my gerontology, because I think a lot of the policies that can affect women now, you know, no matter at what age, will only benefit the aging population. You know, I don't know, like it's not just about the future, it's not just about old people, it's about us now. And I think working and how we can work, you know, like Yvonne said in her talk, you know, I think changing, especially like maybe minorities and any inequalities that have existed in the past, will only be beneficial. So sorry, I think I'm rambling. I didn't know I had to talk, but anyway.
That's okay. That's okay. I mean, we just want to have everyone's point of view because we have a very diverse group of people, and I think this is pretty exciting going into that discussion. Torsten, what about you?
Going off mute. Hi. So yeah, Torsten Best. I work for Rio Tinto. I lead the benefits area of expertise for APAC, but also the global lead for benefits innovation for Rio Tinto. So I've got a particular interest in retirement funds in the traditional way as they are now, but the future of retirement, financial education and literacy, different ways of working. So what workplaces, the type of work, nature of work might look like in the future. And then thinking about from an employer perspective, what are the reward practices, the HR policies, HR practices that we need to have in place to support different ways of working into the future.
Thank you, Torsten. Rupen, last but not least, what is
hi, yeah, sorry for joining late. Rupen Shah, I run the longevity business for SCOR as a reinsurance company, have been for the last 10 years. I was quite interested by this particular table, not only because of what we're seeing at the moment, but even before, as what might be the longer term or medium term impact of how people work, but separately also following on from the Torsten, just interested in as the population globally has less and less access to DB pensions. I mean, even for professionals and people in the industry like us, it's tough enough planning your own retirement when it's DC type funding, and so it's really passionate about trying to find a way to educate people and help them make the right decisions into the future, and interested in how I don't think there's a retirement age anymore. It's all merging.
No, I agree. That's probably a trend, and we'll discuss it as we go along. We have two people that just joined. Before we kickstart, maybe Paul, could you, in a few words, introduce yourself to the group and what is your interest in longevity?
Wow, there's a big question, Gerald. So my name's Paul Deemer. I'm the head of diversity at NHS Employers, which is an employers association in England. We represent the NHS organisations across the country, so 500 odd NHS organisations and 1.3 million staff, as the 5th largest employer in the world. I suppose we've got a natural interest, both from a business point of view and from a workforce point of view around longevity in all sorts of ways. So I'm just here today really to listen to the experts and hopefully learn something.
Well, we hope also that you will contribute your own experience, because we can all learn from each other. So thank you very much for joining, Paul. Well, I think without further ado, maybe Yvonne, why don't you share some thoughts with all of us regarding the future of work from a longevity perspective?
Okay, thank you very much, and it's great to hear from you all. Actually, this roundtable being a small event, it's really nice to hear your introductions to start us off, and hopefully I can talk to them. The sound has cut in and out for me. I don't know if any of you are having the same problems. You can hear okay. Okay. I've got helicopters overhead, a tractor in the field behind me sawing wood, and an unstable internet connection. So I'm gonna take myself off video while I talk, and hopefully at least what I say will come over. And I'll keep pausing and making sure everybody's still with me. So just a few minutes worth of background on this issue from my perspective. So I wanted to actually ask the question and start defining the question really. We've been given the topic of how will the future of work impact longevity? And arguably you could ask the question the other way around, how will longevity impact the future of work? So just defining the terms I want to use there so we're clear on the question. I think longevity in this context is defined by data that shows we're already living 10 years longer than our parents, 20 years longer than our grandparents. And given that increased life expectancy, we outlive our savings by somewhere between 8 and 20 years. And many of you on the call will know all that data and already be responding to it with your product development and different responsibilities. The population as well, the over 50s, over 55s is the fastest growing workforce segment in many developed nations. And arguably what we've seen as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic is that we will have a situation where there's mass unemployment. And so whether or not we'll have the same types of pressures on the labour force that we have had, given these ageing population demographics, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Are you all with me? Can you all still hear me okay? Gerald, if you could give me a thumbs up. Yeah, okay.
We can hear you loud and clear.
Great, thank you. I think longevity is also defined by pension systems that are continually being eroded in value or failing the beneficiary. And given several of you are working in this area, you'll know exactly what I mean. But those stresses are coming from state intervention, imposing later retirement ages and reducing tax concessions and restricting earnings. They're also coming from market pressures like tumbling investment returns. There's also socio pressures around mistrust of pensions and a lack of understanding because of their complexity. And longevity is also defined by failing health systems, failing care systems, intergenerational conflict and age bias. And if we look at the future of work, how we're defining that, skills half-life reducing to 2.5 years. We see threats around the future of work by technology replacing millions of jobs, and the data is so prolific on that, it's difficult to keep up to date with what will be replaced with automation in future. Future of work is also defined by an increasingly growing self-employed population, and they're often poorly supported by formal social protections in many countries, and we've seen the evidence of that very clearly given the pandemic. I think future of work is now also defined by mass unemployment and a recession deeper than we've experienced to date, and by a switch of emphasis from low-skilled versus skilled work to one of essential workers versus non-essential workers. And that subtle difference, I think, will play out a lot in how we see the employment market, the reward mechanisms, and our responsibility to these types of key workers in the future. It's also defined now by a concept of remote first and a desire by people to change direction so that they can work more flexibly. Either their role needs to change direction or the work itself needs to change direction to create that flexibility, but also defined by people who are having to change direction. So earlier this week, I spoke to a pilot, and he had no idea that when he was growing up, his boyhood dream of flying and his very successful and lucrative career would be wiped out by a virus. He's now 52 and out of work. So people are having to reinvent themselves, and more people want to reinvent themselves and take up different jobs, more so than ever, given this pandemic. We know more people want to move into the caring professions, and I think in the UK we may see a big shift from people in very, very poorly paid care positions at the moment to potentially better offers in the NHS, and I'd be interested, Paul, in your thoughts on that. And we also know people want to work more to remote working. So just reflecting on that, what is the right question to ask here? Does longevity impact the future of work, or does the future of work impact longevity? And in my opinion, I'd say the answer is yes to both questions. The longevity economy shows there's a $9 trillion market for products and services that serve the longevity population. It will drive new roles, new businesses. It will drive the development of the age tech market. And as we see from the financial gaps and demographic challenges I've already mentioned, labour markets will increasingly age. And so the future of work will have to look different to accommodate the older worker. And rapid digitisation means we'll have to reskill and invest in people's futures. And that applies to everyone. Our skills half-life applies to everyone. We're all aging, and all of our skills are in need of an upgrade. And economies benefit when people work. So there's a multi-stakeholder imperative to invest in lifelong learning. And so finally, I'll just reflect very briefly on some of the solutions, because I've painted a fairly gloomy picture there, I appreciate that. But there are some incredibly creative solutions emerging, and I want to just give you a glimpse of what they might look like and then open up for discussion. So first and foremost, I think retaining and hiring in the post-COVID world may need to be underpinned with economic stimulus and potentially more social security support, such as universal basic income schemes or universal basic service schemes. Older populations have found it hard to find work in the past, and I think it'll be even harder now, given we have a high unemployment rate. But their needs will never have been greater, given the immediate impact to pension pots that we've seen as a result of tumbling investments. And thirdly, shifting supply and demand of labour with speed will be essential. And platforms are emerging that facilitate this. So we're working in conjunction with the Accenture People Plus Work platform to deliver temporary talent sharing solutions. And we believe that that type of consortium approach is going to become more commonplace. Fourthly, we've also seen lots of situations where people are now having to deconstruct and reconstruct jobs to adapt to this remote first potential. So what elements of a job can you take out and delegate to a different resource so that you can make more jobs fully remote? I think we'll see more onshoring. We'll see an increase in digitization. It's certainly accelerated with everybody on Zoom, but will it affect automation acceleration? According to our research, the jury is still out on that one. And then my final comment, a glimpse of what we're seeing. Flexibility is key. We'll see a blurring of lines between employment and self-employment, a blurring between retirement and semi-retirement, and multiple stakeholders will need to enable that flexibility. So we'll see, and we are already seeing, new employment contracts, project style working, technology matching workers to work, more localization, and regulations to allow drawing pension whilst working. So those are a few thoughts to kick off the conversation.
Yes, thank you very much, Yvonne. And I think if I try to think of 3 themes I would like to maybe us to discuss over the next 30 minutes, and if I take away from what you just said, I think one that comes almost constantly in the discussion is skills. You know, you were talking about how quickly skills are fading, you know, the skills lifetime, the need to retrain people. And I think maybe we start with skill. The other one that I would like to touch on would be maybe the conflict, you know, the age conflict and the intergenerational society, the fact that at the moment when you retire, quite often you disappear from the picture, whether you're talking about home care, whether you're talking about retiring in a dedicated space for older people, whether, you know, you're talking about golf courses in the US, etc. And I think this goes back to maybe how longevity can impact work, and maybe people can get more involved in society in general. And I think that's the second topic I would like to touch on. And then maybe a very topical is going to be COVID-19, and see if the way everyone, because we have a very diverse group of people here, some people in the finance industry, some other in the corporate sector trying to think about it, some doctors. So I think it would be good to see if the current environment is changing the way you're thinking about either implementing some of the measures that you had in the pipeline, if you want to bring them forward, or actually to delay them, and if there are new thoughts or new experience that you're thinking of applying to the longevity story because of COVID-19. So we have around 30 minutes for that. Let me first ask you about skills, and this is a question to anyone, please. You can unmute yourself and get in, or raise your hand. I think that's how to do it formally, but I'm sure we can manage without raising hands because I can't see it on my screen. So about the skills, and here maybe it's more something that I want to throw in for some of the corporate people that we have on the call. How are you thinking about retraining or helping people to keep up to date on today's world, which is changing so quickly? So maybe, Thorsten, I'm maybe going to put you on spot here, because how is Rio Tinto thinking of that from an HR perspective? And maybe it's something that is not only for the longevity for the older people, but I guess it's something that can be applied also to the longevity framework.
Yeah, it's probably fair to say that we're in the early stages of thinking about that a little bit differently, and probably not as, I'm using the word mature, as we might want to be in this space. I think some of the concepts are this notion of entrepreneurships, and how we potentially retain skills and knowledge internally in different ways than we have done in the past. So one of the things that we're doing at the moment is working more closely with our outplacement counselling partner, and reshaping the way we engage with them differently. So rather than looking at, we have a group of people who need to exit the organisation, we help them through retraining, reskilling to find work outside Rio Tinto. How do we apply those concepts to people who might be at risk of losing their job in the future, and actually apply those similar principles whilst they're still employed? That may help them not only with work outside of Rio, but potentially stay within Rio Tinto. So I think it's an opportunity to think about outplacement very, very differently. I think there's a growing sort of appreciation that actually retraining an employee for skills of the future in the long term is actually much cheaper and much more effective than potential cost of redundancy. So let's be smarter about having an internal training college or academy where we identify those roles that are likely to change materially or no longer exist in 2 or 3 years, and think about what are the roles that we know we will have and the skills we do need, and actually actively engaging people to say, we think that the role you're currently performing is going to be at risk in the next 2, 3, 4 or 5 years. Let's work together on how we can retrain and reskill you, if that's something that you're interested in doing, into the roles or the types of skills and work that we know we will need, and actively have that conversation with our people. The other thing we're starting to think of is something that, Yvonne mentioned, this idea of actually sharing, the consortium approach of sharing skills and knowledge, and mining in particular. It's a very fluctuating industry. Markets change, iron ore prices change, aluminium prices change, and we traditionally would look at that and go, well, here's 1,000 people we need to lay off because there's a dip in the market, and then 9, 12, 18 months later we bring them all back on. Why not work in that consortium approach and actually lease those people out for the period when we don't need them, where they experience different skills, learn new skills, build different ideas, and we bring them back in more engaged and more skilled and more trained when we need them back again. Again, a much cheaper and more effective way of us doing it. And that then goes into a thinking of lifelong employment. So how do we build structures and policies and frameworks around continuity of service and entitlements and different benefits if someone leaves our organisation for 6 months or 6 years, but ultimately wants to come back, to sort of have a lifelong open door for people to engage with us as an employer. So they're probably just some of the ideas.
No, thank you. It's quite interesting. Does anyone want to make any comment from on that topic again, or link to what Torsten just said here? I was wondering if I may ask you again, Torsten, if there's a lot of talk, of course, that there's benefit in diversity, and we've seen studies that some, and even the COVID-19 crisis, you see that there's a question whether government run by women are more effective than the one that were run by men. Is that in the approach you have to the thinking of longevity? Are you also, from a diversity perspective, thinking about longevity as something that could add value to the company over time?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I think about, we had a really interesting comment with our global CEO, made that at a town hall in Brisbane last year, where he said, diversity is not a problem for Rio Tinto. We operate in 37 countries. We've got people from all walks of life who work for us. We have a lot of diversity. Our problem is inclusion. So we're trying to sort of shift thinking about diversity and inclusion and turning it around to inclusion and diversity. So it's more around how do we leverage the diversity we have and think about diversity more in terms of skills and experience, rather than there's more traditional ways of thinking about it in terms of gender or ethnicity or those sort of categories. So let's think about diversity and inclusion in terms of skills and experience. And that should organically mean that we tick all the other boxes anyway, because you will get that diversity of skills and experience by engaging the different genders, different races, different ethnicities, different backgrounds. So it's probably a subtle shift, but I think just it's a mindset shift around a different way of thinking about inclusion. So we're definitely doing that. I think talking about experienced workers and the skills and experience they bring as opposed to the older worker, I think again is a subtle but important shift in the way we think. And then the sort of concept of entrepreneurship, of actually thinking about what are the skills and experiences and knowledge that our more experienced workers bring, and how do we better leverage those, whether that's through coaching or mentoring roles or project leads, or those sort of things.
I want to throw a question here at all of you who work in the insurance business, and I think that there's a few of you here. Of course, the key issue we have with the pension, and we discussed about pension, defined benefit versus defined contribution, and how difficult it is. And of course, the longer you stay active working, the better it is for your own pension. So, we are here throwing ideas. Is there, in your reflection, a way that you could incentivize some of the people that have insurance with you or that investing with you to maybe retrain, either helping them from a financial point of view to facilitate those things in the same way that you see people that exercise tend to get a discount on their health insurance because they would be maybe healthier than someone who's sedentary. Is that something that you're thinking of, like encouraging people to retrain if they come with a plan that would help in a way to manage, of course, the financial, what everyone discusses as the ticking bomb, that is the pension, and encourage them to work for longer? Maybe, I don't know, Jean, Matt, or Rupen, if it's something you would like to discuss.
I think it's a reasonable question. I might ask the other ones about more on the incentive side, because I'm not, although I've worked in pensions in the past, I'm a lot more on the protection side. But on the protection side, and that's things like disability income protection cover for when people are off work, to be able to insure them for longer, and as part of an employee scheme, if the employer is big enough, that's definitely a possibility thing to do. So as people get older, of course, they increase their chances of having periods off for sickness and disability. And that's something we might be able to do more of. I would like to just say one more thing as well about retiring and how long you save for, based on, I explained earlier that part of my dissertation was around this. And as we go into defined contribution schemes, we will likely see a lot more people working for longer by default, because of a need, or at least a perceived need, that they're not going to have the retirement that they need. So because of that uncertainty of when the right time to retire is, if they're going to do that sort of cliff edge retirement, which as we've already said is a bit of a blur. But when I created a model to find out what's most likely to determine when people retire, it was from the English Longitudinal Study of Aging, which some of you might be familiar with. The number one factor in my model was, do I like my job? And that was really the biggest driver of all of them. And if you think about this and some of the things Torsten was saying when I wasn't distracted by the fantastic cricket pictures behind him, you know, that was one of the things that came out a lot, is about this idea that making people feel valued, making them feel included, and with access to equal benefits to the other people, is one of the key things that we can do, which will ensure them continuing to save.
Thank you, Tiara, please, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. One of the things I think that I'm discovering, I work with a lot of investment firms, private equity, and lawyers, and that's where I do a lot of my work in health and wellness. And I think almost the missing thing now, given what's happened, given the social trauma, is it's about acknowledging what happens on a personal level, so in an individual way, because it's different for everyone. But I almost think like the missing piece of the puzzle in terms of people is understanding their purpose, their role in the company, understanding the purpose of the company, looking at you know, companies having renewed missions, really, you know, looking at what their post-COVID mission is, given what's actually happened. So, you know, understanding the purpose of the individual, I think, will allow, and communicating that within sort of the realms of the company, will allow them to really sort of know where they are, whether they're at home, whether they're in the office, and hopefully help them to sort of plan a path for the future, if they stay in work, or if they're if they're going to retire, or they're going to lose their job.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. Maybe, well, actually,
yeah, maybe I can add to what was so I think the retraining of skills, just allowing people the ability to within an industry or across industry to have transferable skills, and so building on what Torsten was saying, to allows that sort of flexible approach to retirement. The traditional ways you work and you go up, hopefully maybe you go up the ladder and you get more and more responsibility, but maybe you want a trough for a while before you come back to another peak, because you just run out. And I think what is happening with the COVID situation is, and linked to what was just said about purpose, that's your personal purpose versus your purpose at work. There's need for more molding together of those two, and I think you're going to see people maybe we've seen it already. I mean, with people burnt out in some of those industries and retraining as teachers because they feel like they want to give something back. But I think you're going to see even more of that. Maybe, so as everyone was saying, I'm skeptical about healthcare. I think what will in the UK is will people want to go into healthcare in the UK? I think people will see which countries have respected and looked after their healthcare workers the most and go there if they want to. So that I'm a bit skeptical about that particular industry. But I'm actually nervous about what's going to happen post all this in terms of even if you throw funding, people want to come into the healthcare sector. Sorry, that's diverging a little bit, but I think it is we as a firm, we are very much looking at how do you people want to give back, and how do you allow them to do that within the time frame they have in their normal job, and how do you make use, you can make use of technology or remote working as we are to give people more time to do that. I think that's a trend that will hopefully continue and allow people to work longer and therefore put into their pension for longer, because it's inevitable. You will have to save for longer to, and if you're going to live for longer, you're going to have to save for longer to have that retirement that you want.
Interesting point about purpose. I heard a sort of a story not long ago about partners in the big four consulting firms, so your EYs, PwCs, KPMGs, and obviously very successful, well paid, plenty of money to retire on, and a sort of a small study that showed that within 2 or 3 years, 50% of them who didn't have a clear purpose and meaning of what they're going to do post-retirement were dead. So that says all about purpose and meaning. And maybe if I can just ask a quick question of Matt, you talked about insurance, and I think there's we need a fundamental rethink of how pension funds, retirement plans, and insurance is structured. The current sort of limitations or rules at around age 55, age 60, age 65 clearly need to change in a world where people are going to live to 100. But I wonder then also picking up on, we talked about, or Yvonne talked about AI and technology and data. I wonder what the role of more personalised healthcare, personalised insurance based on individual risk, how that will play through, and moving away from more of the group risk approach as we have the data and technology to potentially price risk at an individual level. And one of the interesting things that's come out of COVID-19 is, there's been a lot of debate even in this Congress around the fact that we consider vulnerable people to be those aged over 70 or, those aged over 50 with chronic health conditions. But you can all equally have a 30-year-old who's got a chronic health condition and is just as much risk. And at the same time, you could have someone who's 80 years old who's actually quite well and probably not at risk. So how does that translate into how we might price insurance risk in that context into the future? So we keen to get Matt's views on that, maybe.
Well, it's a fascinating topic, and it's certainly one that's just rising in interest levels within the insurance industry, and we're actually seeing more and more people take action around exactly that, around the idea, and it's a positive thing from an age point of view. I mean, it's talking about your biological age rather than your chronological age, I guess, is the simplest way of putting it. And we will see more and more underwriting based on that as we go forward. I personally don't think group schemes would be going away. I think they might get more individually underwritten within those group schemes, if you like, because we've got more data, exactly like you suggest. But I do believe that that group schemes, I believe, here to stay, because the big employers will continue, especially to need them, and indeed some of the smaller ones. But yeah, I can't see it going any other way over the longer term.
Yeah, our firm is also, we've built a biological age model, and using that starting to use that for underwriting on top of everything is a smoother process in underwriting insurance. But I have a mixed view about that in terms of you go to more and more sort of risk categorization, and the people who need the insurance most, it's not necessarily longevity, but for the protection insurance get left behind. They get priced out, and you lose the sort of a mutuality that you would have had 50 years ago. I mean, it's the train has started and it can't stop in that sort of risk categorization and differential pricing. But it's a shame. That's why DC is not as good as DB.
I would hope it moves more in the way of, yes, those people who were traditionally being excluded actually get more help to enable them to be included. I would hope that was the way it goes. I accept that probably in the shorter term it mightn't go. It might be a way of just positive risk selection. Perhaps we're going a bit too deep into the world of insurance there, but for the group.
Yeah, but I would like
rules for different groups, and what we've seen a lot of companies do is provide incentives in terms of lower premiums if you follow a certain health regime. And I think when you talk about working longer, health is as much a part of it as skills training. And what we've seen in terms of skills training, everyone agrees that it needs to happen, but you look at the higher level employees versus the lower level, and there's a completely different treatment. And what we see more and more, as much as everybody talks about it, is that employers still have this bias of the older worker costs more. And not necessarily in the US because it's mainly defined contribution, but it's really in terms of healthcare. So getting that data out there and showing that, and we're pushing more and more this idea that, a suggested diversity inclusion and how multi-general workforce is more efficient and works better than just, if you look at it just by age cohorts.
No, I don't think that's a key topic. I wanted to transition actually to that discussion about the age stigma, because we talked about, Yvonne, you said, there's of course the question whether longevity impacts work or work impacts longevity. But I think if we want longevity to impact work, there needs to be an acknowledgement that all the workers are not a burden, as you said, Jean, but that they are an opportunity either in training, in sharing experience, and I guess there's a question about how much it costs, right? Because you always expect as you get older, as you have more experience, to be paid more. But we also had the example mentioned by you, Rupen, I think, about people maybe wanted to take a step down, have more purpose, even if that needs to be paid less. I don't know what is the view there from all of you on that topic, and what could be some solution to try and bring down the barrier on the age stigma and get maybe all the people more integrated in companies, but also in the wider society, rather than being seen as something that you push aside for younger generation. I don't know if you have any view on that or any strong feelings about it. Maybe, I think Sandrine, you mentioned that something, about minority, that you were something that was quite close to your heart. So maybe you could expand a bit on what you started saying when you introduced yourself to the group.
You put me a bit on the spot there. Sorry, I just nearly fell. Yeah, I think that for me at least, I think that it's something we need to change it from younger generations to, like, the more inclusive we start being from now, from people younger than me who are in the workforce, the more we start that mindset now, perhaps that will just be ingrained in us, so that this won't even be a discussion, hopefully, in 20 or 30 years. So that's kind of where, like, I try and, like, make my thing, but obviously that's not going to help people now, and there's a big thing right now. And so, yeah, so for me, I don't really know how to answer that question entirely, because I'm a convert. I think the more diverse a group is, the better. It's more interesting. Yeah, I mean, like, I'm not an expert at all in this discussion, but I find it fascinating to empower myself with knowledge, so that I can make better decisions and be a better citizen, a better, so not just like within my own expertise. I feel like it's really good to, I don't know, make sure that that's how I am. So I don't know, just to kind of push that out there into the world, make sure people are doing a bit more of that. But I don't know, I'm just one person. I don't know if that makes a difference, or sorry, I don't even know if I answered your question. Sorry.
No. I think you did to a certain extent, and that, as you said, I think it's something that needs to be seen as the norm rather than something you have to fight for. And I think I agree. Unfortunately, quite often in the world we live in, it's a bit of money that is driving, that is a driving force. And I think it's important to remember that there's a lot of hype around the Z generation or the millennials, etc. But where still most of the purchasing power is with people above 60, and this is really where the wealth is. And I'm sure that it's easier to know what you need as a consumer when you are 60 plus and you want to talk to a 60 plus, rather than being a 20-year-old trying to tell 60-year-old what they should be doing with their time, with their money, what kind of product they want. And I think that's something that companies, I imagine, especially on the consumer-facing side, are starting to acknowledge. I don't know, Yvonne, if you have any comment on that, from the consultancy work that maybe you've been doing at Mercer.
Yeah, I think the diversity angle, I've just put a couple of things in the chat there to share with people. Our research shows age diverse teams outperform less diverse teams, and there's a whole range of reasons for that. Their turnover levels are lower, so that brings costs down massively. In fact, they actually tend to create a stability around them as well. So this is something I've been looking at with companies out in the Middle East, where typically everywhere you look, younger people want rapid progression, and they're trying to create more stability in teams and keep younger people in the organisation better. Well, the research shows that with an age diverse team, you create more stability. People want to stay because they learn from the different generations in amongst them. So I think that's been a really interesting finding. And I think your question may have moved on slightly, Gerald, while I was typing. So if I've missed a little bit, just remind me what you asked.
No. I mean, it was pretty much that point, trying to, as tangible proof and trying to convince people that, once you pass 60, your preemption date is over and that's it. I think you still have a lot of value to add to the company, to society in general as well. And I think showing that experience is a key contributor from a human perspective, but also from a profitable perspective, because I said quite often it's still very much profit driven, right or wrong, in the world we live at the moment. Yeah. So I think that's an important point.
Okay, I think what was missing for me in this area was the evidence, the business case evidence for older workers, because there is so much prejudice. We've seen it's rife. It's across recruitment, it's across retraining, it's across distribution of training spend, performance grades, pay and bonus awards, promotions. The older you get, the less well served you are by all of those systems that enable others to thrive. And so we've spent a good 3 or 4 years actually putting that evidence base together in the report I've just put up there on the chat. So there's about 6 or 7 case studies that are quantifying how, by how much your bottom line improved through age diversity and through just being respectful and inclusive. I think to Torsten's point earlier, wasn't it? You said you're diverse, you're just not yet inclusive. I think age is the last bastion of inclusivity in organisations. It's still fine to laugh about people having big birthdays. That greetings card industry thrives on making fun of sexy and 60 or still standing and 70. Why is it okay to laugh at that? You wouldn't laugh at a derogatory remark about a black person or a woman or a disabled person. So a lot of barriers to break down, and we've found one of the only ways of doing that, I'm afraid, is that hard financial quantitative evidence, which is what we've tried to put forward.
Yeah, thank you, Yvonne. I mean, we are in the last 10 minutes of our discussion. I was in charge of hosting it, but I think I want to give 5 minutes before doing a wrap up. If there's any topic that any of you would like to bring up that we haven't touched on, that is close to your heart, or any comments you would like to share for a last 5-minute discussion before we wrap it up. And again, we are a small group, so please go ahead. Yeah, Taiba.
Oh, I mean, I was just going to respond to Yvonne's comments about age and having coached some barristers one-to-one, 60 plus, 65, who are far healthier, far more cognitively sharp than some of the 30-year-olds that I am actually coaching in the Middle East. And it's interesting from a health point of view just to see how sharp, how on it they are, and they tend to have less anxiety because of the way that they've grown up through their working life. But I think that the real key is to try and educate new leaders coming through about the value and the experience and the wisdom that comes from those who are seen as older. And I think it's just about making sure that we are communicating. I think Norway do it really well, don't they? There's a real value around people over a certain age and listening to hearing their wisdom and that's just my little perspective. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, I'd like to add a little perspective on that as well. I mean, I think 15 years ago, my father was forced to retirement age at 60. He's got a nice pension and doing fine, but he was just bored. So he went, after about 2 months, he went back into a sort of initially a temporary role, a part-time role, became full-time for a while. But I think the difference there was he didn't need to work, but he was there, and so he's very happy to help others who are learning because he had a lot to give. And so because he wasn't looking to rise up the ladder, he wasn't playing any politics. And I think that's the other value of the older worker, where they've decided that they want to slow down. They're much more willing to help and assist the rest of the workforce. That politics piece, which happens in every organisation, no matter what size, is sort of bit behind them. They don't care about it. They're more helpful. They're more outspoken in a positive way.
Yeah. One thing that I would like to see, and I agree with everything that's been said, is from the outside looking in. I have not seen as much work looking at trying to match an employee generational base to the customers. So, for example, a lot of technology is used to help people age in place, but most of the tech companies like to hire the very young, the very young workers. And I think if we could shine some light about that to show that, and especially in the service industry, that, the people that you're dealing with are your age and they understand, you as an older person, I think that would also help to change some of the biases.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's, I fully agree with you on this.
So for me at least, oh, sorry. I was just going to say I think you mentioned about how COVID-19, how that was going to affect us all. And I'm pretty excited about like the flexibility that Yvonne mentioned, and how I think COVID-19 is just going to push that agenda. And I think it'll only help us at every single generation. And hopefully that will be the older generation, that might be the key to helping them, kind of thing. Obviously this big thing here, but for me, that's the thing I'm most excited about, is actually seeing how flexibility actually becomes a thing. Because I think again, I think it was Yvonne who said that the line management distrust and stuff, and now they've just had to trust us because we're all at home, so I'm quite excited to see what comes out of that, and let's see, maybe that might be one of the answers that helps all generations, and so not just the older, but all generations.
For me, a really big question is how all this comes together. So, we've talked about sort of fundamental needs to rethink pensions and DC schemes and look at rethink legislation and regulations that support lifelong employment. What does it mean for tax systems and incentives and different ways of looking at investments that support that sort of longevity? And there's obviously roles to play for government and policymakers and employers and regulatory bodies and providers and employers. So how all that comes together and who plays the central role in coordinating that and where does that accountability sit? And I think that's a really complex and challenging question, but I think it all needs to come together for it to really be successful in the longer term. But it's and that's I guess a question we ask, and I'm not quite sure what the answer is.
Yeah.
Just one thought from me, which is around the current situation. Generally, we're talking about the current older population, but of course there will be future cohorts, and we need to look at this whole thing as a life course approach. The people who are starting to save into their pensions today, many of them will, as a result, we always see in times of economic crises that the youngest generation are hardest hit with in terms of employment, the under 25s, and the same we're already starting to witness now. We do see that people who were experienced youth unemployment in the 1980s recessions experiencing much worse outcomes, not being able to retire, being much lower paid, and it brings you through the life course. And there will be talented people out there that we can bring in and actually help them. It sounds wrong to say we're going to help a 19-year-old age gracefully, but we are. That's what we can do. And we need to not just look at this as individual cohorts, and that's part of this supposed intergenerational conflict, is looking at things in age bands rather than a life course and more across the way like that. So let's not overlook that, is what I guess I'm saying.
No, and I think you're right, and I think you all made very good points in the last round. I was actually going to summarize or to wrap it up by saying we definitely see there's a need for skills, training, education, not at the first stage of your career, but throughout your career. And I think the other point that is very important is the purpose. And I think, Rupen, your example with your father was quite telling. I think having a purpose is what will keep people employed, what will help some of the pressure on the financing of pension. Because as long as you have a purpose and you feel that you bring something for yourself, but also for your colleagues or society, I think then there's not a problem to continue to work. It's more when, as you said, you're basically driving towards 60 and you don't like your job anymore. This is always going to be difficult. So the purpose, the retraining of the skills and the education, I think are the key point. And Torsten, I think you obviously show where the problem is. The problem is who's taking a lead there, and whether it's governments through some regulation, whether it's some companies through some internal policy that try to do it. I think it's going to be a mix of all that. But it's clearly that there need to be some incentive in place for people to move in that direction. On those words, I will wrap it up. I thank you all for taking 1 hour of your time to join us today. I found it extremely useful. I thought it was the case for all of you. And I thank you for participating in the longevity conference. Thank you, particularly Yvonne. Terry, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick one. Paul Dima just sent his apologies for having to drop out in the middle of the call. He did say that he was very happy to answer any questions anyone had around the NHS, and also very happy to connect with everyone afterwards if they had any specific reason to do so. So yeah, just again to add my thanks to Gerald and Yvonne for hosting, and for everyone for participating. So thank you very much.